And part of what I think makes them more susceptible to a fear-based attack is a lack of any sort of spiritual or religious faith. And that doesn't mean you have to go to church every week for this to happen. And it doesn't mean you actually have to have an active participation. You know, a lot of times maybe you were just raised, people were raised in a religious household where they're less likely to be susceptible to these types of fear-based manipulations. And what I find on the left and people who are in the cult is an extreme need for external validation. They, whether it's because partially because they don't have that connection to the source or the creator or however one might think of it, but all, and they may not have gotten the acceptance and the love from their family that they needed in order to have a strong sense of self and a strong belief in themselves. They need someone from outside of them to tell them that they're good, they're right, and that they're have the right position, the right thinking. And that is how they get the conformity, that sort of ideological conformity, the conformity to the groupthink that happens within the cult, the progressive cult, as I call it. And I just don't find that most independent thinkers or most people on the right need that external validation in the same way. And I will often hear people who are, you know, libertarians or on the right or independents say, you know, I just don't really care what you think of me. And it's not that they don't, you know, all of us do to a certain extent, but an intense need for to be liked and to be right, and to feel like you are part of a group contributes to people on the left being susceptible to that fear-based manipulation, but also being unwilling to stand up against anybody else on the left and to stay sort of in lockstep with it. You know, the other thing that has happened on the left, I think, is that they have sort of replaced their any religious faith with almost a religious faith in government and experts. So what I like to say is they worship authority and they idolize the expert. And what that causes within them oftentimes is the ability to hold a great deal of cognitive dissonance. You often will hear someone say like, how can that person actually believe those two things? They just don't go together. They can't both be true. But if an expert, which is someone in their mind who has been educated, right, and has the degrees, and then also has the credentials, whatever license or certification that the government has given them, if two experts said two things that don't go together, they will believe both of them because they have to believe the experts. So even though those two things can't possibly be true, they will believe it. That is why, for example, when Anthony Fauci said you don't need masks, they believed it. And then when he turned around and said, yeah, you actually do need masks, they believed it. And when he said, hey, maybe you want to wear two masks, he did actually say that at one point.
Yeah.
They believed it. It's and that is something that, and I'm not saying there aren't hypocrites or people on the right can't have cognitive dissonance, but I think it's that faith in the expert that they have been cultivated and indoctrinated to have that causes them to walk in lockstep with things that just don't make any sense going together. And I was guilty of that myself, and I talk about some ways in which I think I was guilty of that in the book. And I just don't see that same kind of thing on on the right or in people who are libertarian or independent or yeah, and it results in a lack of thought. It's like if you, I don't know if you watched any of the interviews of people who were attending the No Kings protests that happened
Uh,
a little while ago.
Not
Yeah,
really,
I
no.
know. It was terrible. They'd ask them and they'd repeat a talking point,
Yeah.
and let's say that talking point is, well, Trump's violating the Constitution. Well, how? Can you explain to me what he's doing? And almost none of them could because
Yeah.
there's no thought behind it. It's a repetition of what the media, as we were talking about, and then the Democratic leaders have repeated over and over and over again to them, so they repeat it back. But there's no thinking behind it, and I think that that's a good example of just sort of how the fear, because there has been complete fear mongering that Trump's going to destroy democracy. He's going to, become a king, an authoritarian king. And so there's no thinking behind it. And I think that is why you see very few people on the left able to break free from it.
So I will say I kind of disagree with you. Like I liked a lot of what he said, especially towards the end. But as someone who's personally an atheist as well, I do think that's a little bit of an oversimplification when you look at why the left is the way they are. I think there's a lot of things in religion that are also not logically sound. We don't need, and this isn't by any means trying to get to any kind of religious debate or disrespect that point of view, but like the idea that God is all loving, all powerful, all kind, but also allows tragedy to happen. And I think a lot of times Christians will have their explanation and they'll default to God, but I mean that in itself is also illogical, right? I don't think it's wrong to say that there's a relation to that. I definitely think that because as an atheist, I think one of the most frustrating things in dealing with other atheists is that, yes, they do tend to be leftist. They do tend to, there was the point where they literally said Fauci is science, which for anybody who's a real scientific minded person, it's just like, no, that didn't go through any scientific method. That's religion. That's religion placed in. But I think the difference, I think the difference in that example specifically is government ran science versus science, the methodology, right? Like gravity, we can all test gravity, and that's because of the scientific method, and that's a fact, right? That's a objective reality. So yes, I do think that it is related in a sense. I do think that this there has been a drift, like in that. Even though I know a lot of leftists who are religious, and I think it is also important to point out that socialism is actually a Christian ideology that was started in the Enlightenment. But that aside, I do think that there is a relation to that in terms of like this side of the aisle has pushed away from that, but I don't think it's unfounded. Like I do think that there is a legitimate criticism to there are these really powerful churches, really powerful Republican backed people. And and you talk about like, fear on the left. I think there's just as much fear of God on the right. In my opinion.
So, let me see how I can try to explain. I'm not sure I disagree with you,
Okay.
Coleman. It's sort of the basically, I think people often want to be connected to something bigger than themselves, and so
Yes.
they will put faith somewhere. And when you went, whether it is hypocritical or you can't prove it, when people put their faith in God, it often gives them a level of comfort
Yes.
that doesn't allow them to be controlled through fear of other humans, right?
I don't
Because
know if that's true though. I think there are a lot of times where
I
pastors have and religious figures have used, things to control people and to fearmonger and.
I would draw a distinction between organized religion and faith. I
Okay.
think that there is a big difference between that. Yes, churches, there are all sorts of churches that I think are horrible institutions. I
Oh
think
yeah,
so many of them are just about money. I think so many of them now no longer actually give back to the community in any way. There are all sorts of things. And I personally believe over time, organized religion has been a huge control mechanism. Okay.
yes,
Modern day people of true faith, I'll just put it that way, leaving out that, have this, in my experience, have this sense of peacefulness, this sense of the fact that God has them covered, that God has their back, that everything's going to be okay, in a way that most of the people I meet who don't have that. And it
sure,
is what I think leaves them more open to fear-based attacks. But I also think that so many people on the left have taken that kind of faith and put it into the government and
yeah, that I agree with 100%. Yeah,
unquestioning, unblinding faith in the government. And so when the government frightens them, they are willing to do whatever the government says in order to be safe. And I think you saw that during COVID. You know, people, like, I was talking to someone on a podcast not that long ago who told me that his neighbor actually called the cops on him during 2 weeks to flatten the curve
oh my
because he was
god,
walking alone at night without a mask and didn't was not an essential worker. That is, you know, the kind of thing that I'm talking about, where that
sure,
fear just, and also, just to be clear, you know, like, not, I don't think everybody who is religious is exempt from this, and I don't think everybody who isn't religious is subject to it. It's just
yeah,
my experience of people on the left being like sort of embedded in it in Washington, is that generally they are not very religious people.
sure.
They don't have that faith, and they've placed that faith in the government, and they are extremely motivated by fear.
Yeah, yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I think part of it too. I guess if my analysis, if I were to look at this, I would say it's not so much faith; it's more just the human condition, the human, human nature. I mean, if you whether you want to call it faith or fear or whatever. I mean, I think this is just how human beings psychologically act. I think in the on the point of your point where like faith is kind of the distinguishment. I remember hearing Alex O'Connor talk about how like he even kind of gives like he gives credence to the idea of like maybe it is true that people act better as Christians or religious people or whatever. But what if I just don't believe it? Like, what if I acknowledge all that, but I just at the end of the day, I don't believe there's a God? Like, is the choice to lie? And I don't know if that's right either. So I do wonder if it is more about in my theory, I wonder if it's more about the reaction to, this period of a lot of religiousness, high church attendance, this Christian culture that was in America for decades, that is now kind of culminating to this leftist ideology. I wonder if it's more so a reaction to that versus that lack of faith is the cause of that. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, and I would say, I think my parents may have been part of the reaction to that. I
Hmm.
think, but I think what, you know, one can choose to behave in a very Christian way without believing in God. One can, for
Sure.
example,
Yeah.
believe in the golden rule. One can believe in the moral code embodied in the Ten Commandments, for example, and not believe in God. And I'm not saying that I am not saying that I wasn't meaning to imply in any way
No.
that religious people are better or
Sure. Sure.
worse or
Yeah.
anything. What
I wasn't
I
trying to
just
pigeonhole
have,
you in
have
that. Sorry.
seen was that difference. And So the other, I guess that, but those were the main, I think, differences that I really saw.